very much, Mark. I appreciate your introduction.
Welcome to the International Conference on Globalization, Entrepreneurship, and Emerging Economies. This conference, as you know, is sponsored by the Center for Business and Economic Research. This paper is called Globalization, Entrepreneurship, and Emerging Economies. I'm Warren Matthews from Belhaven University in the US, and I'm pleased to be with you here today. Before the fall of the Roman Empire, relations among peoples were often settled by the sword. Kings and emperors amassed large armies and attacked rivals to take their land, their gold and silver, their animals, and their people. Slavery was common. Long distance to the New World, seeking to find India and other places. As these trading ventures yielded exotic new goods, the urge to trade expanded. Monarchs in Europe dispatched explorers to discover and colonize some of these distant lands, and globalization was underway. As the Industrial Revolution advanced in the 18th and 19th centuries, new technologies such as iron and steel, railroads, electricity opened new opportunities around the world. Since these days, mankind has sought wealth through trade.
I have a feeling some people will be finding this difficult to hear.
When wealth and other nations fell behind and remained poor for centuries. In the modern era, most nations of the world seek peaceful globalization to promote economic growth, increase productive efficiency, and eliminate poverty. Much has been accomplished in these three areas. The future success in these three areas will depend on how well nations can work together to capture the benefits of advancing technology to benefit all mankind. Years ago, China and Europe were similar in their stage of development.
Professor, is there any way that you can up the volume? It is very difficult to hear.
Since 500 BCE, China had dominated its continent. Only in 1840 did the European colonizers appear and establish limited trading outposts that infringed on Chinese hegemony. The period of 1840 to 1950 is seen in China as the age of humiliation that ended with the victory of the Chinese Communist Party in 1950. 400 years ago in Europe, there were numerous city-states and regional powers that fought for power and territory. Religion played an important role in the wars of the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe. By 1750, the Industrial Revolution took root, and there were soon many industrial, scientific, and political advances. Numerous nations explored the world seeking gold and other tradable goods. The Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company were awarded royal monopoly privileges to seek and develop trading opportunities in the New World. The city-states of Europe became nations and modern commerce was born. As technology advanced, large manufacturing firms developed new goods and entered into new markets. The relatively low cost of labor in the developing nations such as China, India, Taiwan, South Korea, and Indonesia led to long supply chains. This process of globalization provided jobs for emerging nations and low-cost consumer and industrial goods for developed nations. In the past 2 decades, there has been some pushback in the developed nations as people see factories shut down and move to Asia or elsewhere. People suffering from high unemployment after the global financial crisis or the COVID-19 era of shutdowns blame globalization for their plight. The common refrain is for trade restrictions or other forms of protectionism. Most economists support the concept of free trade and globalization. Theory suggests that such policy will lead to a more efficient allocation of resources and higher incomes. Sometimes overlooked is that there will be winners and losers. Some workers will be displaced without the resources to pursue their next best alternative. The time and resources needed to overcome market imperfections, labor and credit market rigidities, and monopoly powers bestowed by governments may swamp any benefits flowing to the injured industries and workers. These adverse distributional effects must be managed. After the war,
There's still issues with the volume, I'm afraid, sir. You know, it's very, very difficult to pick up all of it.
and regional trade treaties have been signed, but universal benefits do not always follow. Professor Roderick has used the term hyperglobalism to describe the promotion of economic integration without the necessary political integration to manage the effects of labor market imperfections and growing income inequality. The European Union exemplifies this situation. The euro crisis of 2009 showed the damage that austerity measures imposed on Greece and other southern EU member states, while the member states protected the euro. Economic integration was enforced while political integration was not yet in place. As globalization has advanced since World War II, some observers advocate broader regional or world government. In 1947, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created to deal with.
Sorry, sir, but people are still not hearing the presentation.
We need to yield some measure of their sovereignty to our new global organization. In matters of trade, finance, and defense, such conflicts could threaten all international relationships. The European Union provides an interesting case of this. As globalization has developed since World War II, the EU has become a large and growing target market for many industrial firms, both in the developed world and in the developing world. More importantly, developing nations and firms in those nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America also have sought to trade with the EU. That trade is welcomed by the EU, but all EU regulations must be satisfied. Most multinational firms have little choice but to meet the EU standards. This reality has conferred upon the EU the so-called Brussels effect. That is, the EU from Brussels can effectively regulate worldwide production and commerce. Professor Anu Bradford has presented a thorough and convincing case of the Bradford effect in many industrial sectors. As China grows in wealth and power, it will also have the capacity to set high standards for access to its growing middle class. A mass market of 1.4 billion people. There may be a China effect in our future. India, with a population of 1.3 billion, may eventually be able to set global standards for access to its growing markets as well. The Chinese pattern of hierarchy and domination was quite different from Europe, where the nation states of similar size and power jockeyed for territory and status, often leading to war. China has always been dominant in its region, and a much larger nation than any others in its area. Before 1980, China had little experience using diplomacy and negotiation to negotiate its goals. In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has often stated its goal to achieve the, quote, great jubilation of the Chinese nation by 2050, which is the anniversary of the Chinese victory in the Civil War in 1950. More recently, China has extended the potential tenure of the president without limit, and President Xi Jinping has moved to consolidate his power and purge many senior officials. The People's Revolutionary Army Navy has gained more power, resources, and missions. These missions include a Mars landing, hypersonic missiles, the largest navy in the world, and space-based anti-satellite weapons. The CCP clearly has a collectivist nature. For many years, the CCP has had goals of applying modern tools such as systems engineering and decision modeling for social control. Meanwhile, China is moving forward with a facial recognition system that will quickly identify people based on their social score. China has acquired Western firms to share their proprietary technology as a price for access to the Chinese market. Documents published by the CCP describe a new chapter in national security guided by General Secretary Xi Jinping. It includes the community of common destiny for mankind as a national security concept. Since President Nixon's historic opening to China in 1972, Western leaders expected that as China grew and developed, it would become more open to Western ideals of democracy and human flourishing. However, the CCP has consolidated power and increased pressures on Hong Kong in the wave of protests. So there's little evidence that China will soon adopt a more liberal approach to governance. Since 1980, China has worked to take a larger role in international organizations such as the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization. China has placed its citizens in charge of 4 of the 15 specialized agencies or groups within the United Nations structure. The nominee of China to head heads the World Health Organization today. This year, the U.S. led a successful group to prevent China from taking over the World Intellectual Property Organization. China has pressured small nations to vote for the Chinese nominee for these positions, sometimes promising loans or grant funding. Making a success of globalization will require cooperation among nations. In theory, free trade can increase wealth and standard of living for all. In practice, trade restrictions can be used to protect home industries and local jobs. Because of wide differences in the wealth and the level of development of nations, globalization can lead to income inequality and conflict between winners and losers. National leaders must work to resolve these issues for the benefit of all. Entrepreneurs can play a major role in saving globalization from itself by developing new products and markets to create profit opportunities free of government domination. Emerging economies and their leaders can promote free trade without favoritism or protection. Developing nations must continue to promote education and training to prepare their workers for future opportunities. Developed nations must promote trade and open their markets to all producers. Market regulation should be limited to valid safety and environmental controls. If these reforms can be achieved, then consumers will benefit, workers will be employed, and we will achieve maximum benefit of the Earth's resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Matthews. I'm just wondering, before we go to an opportunity for questions, which I hope you will permit, whether you could summarize what you think are the key points, because in the early part of the presentation, I think there will be some elements that were lost because of the issues around the volume. So maybe you could summarize what you think your key points would be in regard to your presentation.
Yes, thank you. I assume you can hear me well now.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think the setup, I needed to change my volume on the installation process, and I couldn't do that in the middle of the presentation. So I'm sorry for the bad volume. However, the key point here, I think, is that globalization, as most economists would say, globalization is a very good thing because it spreads world technology and resources around the world. It allows each nation to produce goods based on their comparative advantage so that they can take advantage of the resources they have. And it would be a good thing if we could increase globalization. The problem with globalization, though, is that there are winners and losers. And in the case of changing supply paths and changing technology around the world, there will be some workers who lose jobs and some firms that are hurt by it. And so the point is we need to consider those winners and losers as we advance through globalization. We can't stop globalization. It's going to happen, but we can, governments can sometimes soften the blow through training programs for workers, for example, for other fiscal policies that would help ease the burden. Also, we see that in the European Union, they've created a common market over the last 50 years, and it's been very successful in many ways. However, what the EU does is they set rules and standards, and anyone that wants to trade with the EU country has to agree to and comply with those standards. And so that, in effect, gives the EU the ability to control worldwide production, because firms that are in, say, Brazil or Congo or Australia, if they want to trade with the EU, they have to meet the EU standards, and it doesn't make sense to follow 2 different sets of standards. And so what firms do is simply follow the EU standards for application around the world. And so that gives the EU an awful lot of control over advancing globalization. Also, we see the rise of China in the last 20 or so years. Well, actually started in 1980 as China opened up, and since that time they've greatly grown a lot. They've brought in a lot of new technology, and they've become a major force on the world stage. However, the Communist Chinese Party has got some goals and objectives that are quite different than what most other nations have. And as I cited in the paper, and I hope people can read that in the Business and Management Review, the Chinese Communist Party controls their economy very, very closely. There are many state-owned firms. In fact, there are many firms owned by the People's Revolutionary Army. And so it's an organizational structure that many of us are not familiar with. And that also limits world globalization because China has tried to acquire technology from around the world, and as a price for admission into their market, they have required some firms to share their technology with them. And so China has able, just a matter of a few years, has been able to develop some world-class industries. For example, this year or next year, they're going to start selling a commercial airplane that looks an awful lot like a Boeing 727 or 737, I mean. And so they control 80% of the world's antibiotics and medicine that are needed around the world. So I'm concerned about that. And that's one aspect of globalization that world leaders need to work on. That is to consider the Brussels effect, the coming China effect, and allow globalization to progress in a manner that will be for the benefit of all mankind.